All right. So I'm gonna get nice and close so make sure this mic picks up. But this is the StoryCorps app, and there's different. You see, there's different like questions that I'll kind of walk through. I did want to do like an interview with you and get your story from start to finish, and maybe we can do that for another day. But
Okay.
there's some interesting questions on here that I'd like to ask you. And I think I kind of talked to you about what this is, and it's just kind of a database, or for people with interesting stories to kind of collect interviews and share them in kind of a social media type way. So they'll walk me through it here. And the first thing is interviewer, and my name's Mike Sayer. I'm 31 years old. Today is November 10th, 2017. I'm speaking with my grandfather and his wife Jean, and we're recording in Carroll, Iowa. And the first thing that I wanted to kind of ask you is to tell me a little bit about your childhood, and where you grew up, and what you were like as a kid.
Well, first off, I was born in 1924 in Breda, Iowa. Yes, easy listening. And I was the seventh in 9 children. We lived at first 6 miles east of Breda, Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I was before I went to school, we moved to a town, a farm a half a mile north of Breda. I started school, went to St. Bernard's. In 32, my dad lost the farm, so I grew up very poor.
How old were you when?
I was 7 years old, because I was in the second grade. Mm-hmm. So when I made my first communion. From there, we moved a mile and a half south of Breda, just rented a house. There was rats in the walls because you could hear them crawling up and down. Oh. We lived there for less than a year, and then we moved 6 miles west of Breda and a mile north and a half a mile west. They're called the Gilson Farm, and we lived there for I was third grade through about maybe the fourth, 2 years. Mm-hmm. Then we moved to a farm, and we didn't farm the land, we just lived in a farmhouse. The farmhouse was 4 miles west of Breda and a mile and a half south. And I went through my 5th and 6th and 7th grade there. In the middle of the 7th grade, my folks moved 5 miles east of Breda and a half a mile south, but I stayed with a school teacher through the 7th grade.
Oh, okay.
And we lived there until March. And in March, I went to Reading Township School, which is a mile north of Alice Corner. But we moved in maybe February, because I graduated. We moved into a little place a half a mile west of Breda, and I walked back and forth to school in my rest of my 8th grade. But I took the county tests, and so I graduated from the 8th grade county schools and also St. Bernard's, so I had 2 certificates there.
So what were you like in 8th grade?
8th grade.
What was your day like?
My day in the 8th grade was mostly studies, because I lived with my teacher.
Oh, right.
And she prepared me for a spelling test in Carroll, county test. And I missed one word, and I came in second. And my classmate, there was 2 of us in a class, Darwin Rodman, and he won it. But I always say that Darwin graduated second in the 8th grade, and I was next to first. And
There you go.
so it was a country school. It was people who we went across the street to get water. We had an outhouse. There in that school there was my sister, two of my sisters, my brother, another two slur horses, and a couple more slur horses, and another kid that lived a mile beyond us, and we walked to school. And my sister Ines tells me I used to carry her. We walked across the pasture, and there was a creek, and she was little, and I carried her across there. I don't know if that's so or not, but so that was then. And before I graduated from there, where we lived in Breda, but I caught a ride to Arcadia to take my county test. But I went to St. Bernard's in the 8th grade from about, I don't know, maybe 5-6 months. And then I went to high school there, and we lived there all the while after that.
What were your parents like?
My parents, my dad was poor. He drank a little more than he should have. My mom was a wonderful person. She was a little heavy, but I'll tell you about her. When I was in the 2nd grade, I got chicken pox, or smallpox, I guess it was. And I was out of school for 6 weeks. And I had to go back to school, and I was kind of scared about it. But she said, I'll take you. So we went in, and it was Sister Reginata. And she said that he got to go back to school, and he missed 6 weeks. Should he stay in? She said, Urban is such a good boy, such a good student. He will catch up with this class in no time. And I grew to be 6 foot tall because she was bragging in front of me, in front of my teacher that I liked. So, but that was the only year I had her. After that, in the 3rd and all the way through till the 8th grade, I got back into St. Bernard School. We were poor.
Yeah.
My dad had different jobs. He worked for WPA once in a while. He traveled a stallion for a guy that bred horses, and that was away. And like I say, if he got any money, he'd like a beer now and then.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
No, I was gonna say I always remember you telling me stories about going to the theater for a nickel, or you were trying to scrape up pennies to get to the theater.
Well, when I was maybe in the 6th grade, Cinderella, or I think it was Cinderella, at a country school, we could go to but we had to have a dime. But I didn't have a dime. So the rest of the kids in the school went to see Cinderella and Carol, and I stayed home. And but it wasn't the folks' fault. They didn't have the dime.
Right.
We trapped gophers and cut off their paws and took them to Carol to redeem them. And I think they redeemed them for 10 cents a pair. Well, on the way home, my sister Adeline was driving, and she ran in the ditch, and I got 50 cents for my gopher paws. And my dad didn't have any money, and she had to pay somebody to pull us out of the ditch. So I said, Dad, I got this 50 cents, and he said, give it to me, and I gave it to him, and I never got it back. And you know, those things I shouldn't remember them. I should say that's past, but
Right.
you still remember them.
Yeah.
Well, then when I got in high school, I worked for Bill's Hatchery after maybe the junior grade, but before that they had a duck pin alley in town, and I set pins in that for 3 cents a lane. But when I got home, I gave it to my mom. I never had any money of my own,
Yeah.
never. So
Wow.
I'm a Scotchman. And then I graduated from Breda. I played basketball. I played baseball. I had good grades. Lessons came easy for me. But when I got to be a junior in high school, I worked for the hatchery. Now, I was young and not too big, but I lifted 100-pound bags of feed. And the women would come in, and they had prints then, printed bags, and they made dresses and stuff out of it. And invariably, that woman would want the print that was on the bottom of the bag. So I'd have to take 4 bags and restack them to get that one on the bottom for her. And we would go and catch chickens, because they also sold it, and they had like a hatchery, but they also marketed chickens. So we'd go out and catch them at nights. That's when I was in high school. But I worked every night after school and Saturdays for $2.50 a week.
Wow. In high
But
school.
then when I got in the summertime, I worked all day and Saturday for $2.50 a week. And that money too went to my mom.
Yeah.
So when I graduated from school, I went to the service, and I got drafted, and I went down to go into the Army. But they had us all lined up, and they said, if anybody would want to enlist in the Navy, they can do it today. So there's 2 of us stepped forward, and I don't know why, but I enlisted in the Navy. And then, like I say, I think about, I don't know where the rest of the money came for us to live on, but I know we didn't live on $2.50 a week. But I took out an allotment, like I was married, and all the while I was in the service, I didn't have any money because I had some money, but the allotment went down like if I had a wife and family for them to live on. So I grew up pretty poor.
Yeah. So then you went into the Navy right after high school?
No, I graduated in 1942 in April, and they drafted me in March 43. And then I went to boot camp in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and I had a 10-day leave. And I went back to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and I went into radio school. But while I was in the radio school before I graduated, I had appendicitis. And me and another guy went to sick bay, and there were some cute girls there, and we joked around with them. And and they took the blood test and all that stuff, and he was sick enough that they put him in a hospital, and I was not sick enough because they mixed up our blood samples. Those girls did. They put me back in my barracks, and that night they picked me up off the floor because my appendix had ruptured.
Oh.
So I laid in a hospital in Coeur d'Alene for 30 days. They didn't have antibiotics, and they used sulfur. And when I was laying there, they gave me a spinal tap, and it put me out. And the surgeon that I had was from Mayo Clinic, and they had a contest to see who could make the smallest incision. Well, mine was only that big, but he opened me up, and he said, "Too late." And I thought, God, I'm going to die right here. It just scared the hell out of me. Here I am, 18 years old, and I want to die on this damn table. Well, they treated me for 30 days, and then my school ended. And I thought I put in for leave so I could go home, recuperate. They said, you're too sick to go home. But a week later, they put me on a train to San Francisco, and I was assigned to the submarine service. So.
In San Francisco. So when did you go over? You went to Guam then, right?
Well, no.
Eventually? Was this-
Then the first stops I made on as a submariner, in the submarine squadron 20, it was a ship called USS Proteus, and we landed in Hawaii and stayed there for 2 weeks, and I thought I was really a salt,
Yeah.
really a sailor.
Yeah.
But and we were right next to a dock, and the bay, the side was open, and the ship was going up and down and up and down, and they got some new recruits in, and they were talking big, you know, they were really sailors, and this, what was his name? Punchy Pocket. He said, "Hey, Knobbe, hand me a slice of bread." So I threw him a slice of bread. He blew his nose in it and acted like he was going to eat. And all these kids, they started throwing up. That was my experience in Hawaii. But from there, we went to Midway. And in Midway, they had a big Quonset building. And we had a basketball team, ship's basketball team. And they had a tournament. And we won the tournament, and I was the MVP.
Wow.
And I scored 55 points. And it was a record until Freddie Heidoff at the same place broke my record, and he's from Carroll. Fred Heidoff, he had that furniture store.
Oh, yeah.
From there, we went back to Hawaii. From there, we went to Guam. And that's when I got transferred to Admiral Lockwood's staff on USS, why can't I remember that? Hudson or something. I had a chance to stay because they wanted me to play baseball in Guam. But
yeah?
we had a baseball team too. But I wanted to be a shortstop and they wanted me to be a pitcher. And I said, I'll just stay with it. And so that's when I was a radioman with Lockwood staff.
Yeah.
And that lasted until August of '45 when the radio officer came in and said, "Get your things packed, you're leaving." I said, "Where am I going?" "Well, first off, you're going back to your Proteus. But then, I can't tell you where you're going, but watch the guy ride the white horse." Well, I knew then I was going to Japan. And so that's where we headed. And we were the first non-combat ship in Japan at the end of the war. Now, like the USS Iowa was in there. But when we went into, they had guns with barrels this big pointed out to sea, and they said the Marines had captured it. Well, I didn't really believe that because at Guam, there was still a bunch of Japanese soldiers in the woods out there, and it was kind of dangerous.
Right.
But anyway, it was all right. But we had leaves there, and there was a kid named Lewicki from Chicago, and he is a real good dancer. He danced in a contest, and he said, "Well, you can't dance. When you dance a waltz, you have to get your head this way, and you have to swing that." But he was really a dancer. Well, we went on leave. We went on leave together, and we ran across some of these Japanese people, and he he took some bars of soap, and he'd want to trade him for something, and he said, "Smell it." And he said, "No, that's enough smell, and you take all the smell away." And so he grabbed it back. But those people would be in those open gutters, sewers,
Yeah.
and they were trying to pick food out of there
Oh,
to
gosh.
eat. Japan was in a terrible, terrible shape when we were over there. And while I was in Japan, we went on leave to Yokohama across the bay. And on the way back, there was a typhoon came up, and we couldn't go, so we caught one of those speed trains of theirs, go 80, 90 miles an hour to take us back to Osaka. That was quite an experience. So, but while I was in Japan, right the last month maybe, before they dropped the atom bomb, I was trying to raise the government on radio, on coding. I was Radio Guam, and try to raise them to get them to agree to a meeting on terms, because warning them that the bomb was going to be dropped if they didn't do such a things. But I could never raise them, and nobody else could either. So they dropped the bomb on what was the first one, Yokohama? Later on it was Nagasaki, but they dropped 2 bombs.
Right.
And
So were you in Japan at that time?
I was in
You
Guam,
were in Guam.
and I thought the bomb took off from Guam, but they later told me that it took off from Okinawa
Yeah.
because of the shorter trip. But on the way from Guam to Hawaii to Japan, we were notified, and I was on the circuit that copied the message, but it was all coded. I didn't know what I copied. That there was 2 Japanese ships that were willing to surrender. So they put prize crews on them, and they brought them in, and they were right alongside of our ship, and we had what they call prize crews on there guarding them. And so that's about as close as I got to the real war.
Right.
Except that in Guam, I was in danger because if you got any leave, you had to be careful where the hell you were because
Right.
they hadn't secured the island yet. Yeah.
All right. So after the war, you
After
you
the
come
war,
back to
we sailed from Japan to Honolulu and went around the Cape and came back in through the Panama Canal. And we had to leave in Virginia or one of those places on the East Coast. And we had to leave, and we walked the streets, and they had signs up, "Dogs and sailors stay off our lawn." And so you knew how much we were appreciated.
yeah.
Well, we went to Chicago, and I got discharged in December 22nd or 23rd of 45, and caught a train from Chicago to the Carroll Depot. And I got to the depot, there was nobody waiting for me, but I had my bag with all the clothes in it. And I started hitchhiking home. And Vernon Bass is her brother-in-law, our brother-in-law, uncle, was running a grocery store in Breda, and he was going home and picked me up and dropped me off at the beer joint. And when I left Breda, you could get a short beer for a nickel. But when I got there, they discontinued that, and all they had was dime glasses of beer. And now tonight, the beer was $5, except we got $1.50 off because it was $3, but we got $1.50 off because it was not holy hour, happy hour.
Oh yeah. All right. So then you got back in town
It was Christmas Eve.
Christmas Eve. And how old were you then?
I was 21.
21. And when did you meet Grandma?
Pat, Grandma
Yeah.
Pat.
Grandma Pat.
Well, this was in 45, pretty close to 46. I went to dances at West Side. I'm guessing that I met her in 47 or 8. I'm not sure. But she was a dance at West Side. And I think she winked at me as she danced by. But at any rate, I asked her if she'd consider having a date with me, and she said, well, sure she would. So I said, I'm not in any hurry, but how about Sunday? And this was on a Friday night. So I picked her up and I played softball then. I took her to a softball game. She thought that was crazy.
It's your first date?
Yeah,
Softball game?
a softball game. And I thought we were going to do something, but she said she couldn't stay. I had to take her home, and I said, why? She had a date that night. So it was not very impressive. And yeah, but she was still in college. She was in Mount St. Scholastica. I think she was a freshman at that time. She graduated in 49. So that could have been in 45. No, it couldn't have been. It had to be 47 or something. But anyway, when she went to her freshman year, and she didn't have enough money to go, and so she worked in Colorado Springs for a year, and then she went back as a sophomore. And in the sophomore year, when she happened to be, the school gave all money, everything, room, board, books, tuition, everything. And she won that award.
Oh, wow.
So she went the last 2 years, junior and senior, on scholarship. Well, when she graduated, well, she'd come home in the summertime, and I'd see her once in a while. But I was invited to her graduation party with 3 other prospects. Now that's kind of humiliating too. But then she went and applied for schools, and she applied for a school at Boxholm, Iowa, and she got a letter back from the superintendent that he saw that she graduated from a Catholic college, and that Boxholm was a Lutheran community, and they expected their school teachers to be active in the Lutheran church, so they wouldn't consider her application.
Oof, couldn't do that nowadays.
I wish I had that letter right now. I think I'd still get some money out of it.
Right.
But then she went to West Side, and the secretary of the school board worked at the bank, and she went in and she turned in her resume, and she got to visiting, and she said, well, she had got this scholarship. And the lady said, you should put that on your resume because that'll help you get the job. Well, she got the job there. Well, so now that was only from Bree to, what, 15 miles or so.
So you were one of 3 suitors.
Four, there was four suitors,
4 suitors.
and I was one of the 4.
So what'd you do? What'd you do to stand
Well,
out?
well,
Besides,
she was close, you see. I mean, I could court her in West Side. If she had got the job at Boxholm, I'd have been out of the, but maybe the other ones had have been too. Yeah.
so when did you get married? How
Well,
did you
we
go
got,
from a suitor to a spouse?
Well, we got married in June 4th of 51. And before that, I was working at J.J. Feldman's Farm Service. And I knew I was going to get married, and this was in April. This is in March of 51. And on a Saturday night, one of the Saturday nights I didn't have to work, I walked into J.J. and told him I had to get a raise. And I asked for 10 cents an hour, and I don't know what I was getting in. And he said, no, I can't do that. Well, I said, if you don't do it, this is my last day working here. Well, he said, that's it. Okay, goodbye, Urban. But there had been a guy, a salesman that called on Farnville and me, and they were looking for a guy to be what they called a second man. And he said, I'm sure you can get the job because I've talked to Harold Harton. So the next Monday night, Tuesday night, I called him up and said, I'd like to apply for the job. So I picked up Pat, and we drove up there and went to his house. And he also was president of the school board. So he said, well, they'd like to hire her, but I should start April 1st. And then they hired her to be a school teacher. But then she got pregnant, and after she was pregnant, she couldn't teach in those days.
Yeah.
So, and I think my pay was, I don't know, it was terrible. It wasn't as much as I was working by the hour. But he promised me that he'd find me a job in a year. Well, that's April 1st. And in August, they had a board meeting, and a wrong guy got elected to the board of directors. And so he told me in the next morning, this was in August, that that we had to get busy and find a job because he is going to resign the job. And I said, Harold, if you're going to resign, why don't I try to get this job? Well, he said, would you want this job? I said, yeah. I said, I know some of the people, I know the business, and it would be better than starting out brand new someplace. And at this time, in December, when he's going to quit, it would be a hell of a time to move with Pat 8 months pregnant. No, 6 months pregnant, because they were born in March. So he said, I'll wait and I'll resign until they don't have a choice. So I was out, they had a board meeting in the office, and Harold came out and said, the board wants to talk to you. So I walked in, and I had 4 good Germans on the board, and a couple Methodists, and a couple Swedes that were Lutheran. And this old cattle feeder out west of town, I got along with him pretty good because I helped him with feed rations. And he said, would you want to run this place? And I said, I sure would like to try. He said, you know, this 51 crop is terrible, and I don't know if you could handle it. I said I could handle it as good as anybody else. He said, I make a motion I would give the damn kid a chance. Somebody seconded, they voted yes, and Harold said, go out and help Fred with the feed mill. So I went out and I went home that night and I said, you know, they said, hire that damn kid, try that damn kid. And I was 26 years old, and they called me a kid. But that's how I got the job, because Harold waited until they couldn't find somebody else.
Yeah.
So that's
So when
not
did you
very
go-
complimentary.
So was that the elevator, or when did
That
you?
was a co-op,
That was the co-op.
yeah, the co-op elevator.
Right. And so, how long did you work there? Because I remember going and visiting.
41 years.
Okay.
41 years. I can remember, and when I was ready to retire, almost, when I was already moved to Carroll, that you were staying with us. And not this house, but the one down below on Applewood. And I got up in the morning and went to work, and you got up with Grandma, Pat. And you drove by, and she got up and you said, well, what do you want to do? He said, I want to go up to see the elevator at Farnville, Grandpa. And she said, Mike, that's 40 miles away. Well, you asked me what I wanted to do. So you got in there, and this was, I don't know what part-time is it, but you drove by the Poons, and they had been hauling manure, and it just stunk terribly. And he said, Grandma, what is... But when you'd get there, those girls would set you up. You might have been 2 or 3. What year were you born?
85.
85.
Yeah.
Well, we weren't in Carroll then. Well, if you were maybe 4 or
You
5
were-
years old.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But anyway, they'd set you up on the, and you'd watch them scale, and you'd punch the thing to stamp it. But you liked that in there.
Yeah. I think that was one of my earliest memories, actually.
Yeah.
Well, so this app says another one of the questions is, tell me a favorite memory of me. Do you have a favorite memory of
Oh,
you growing up?
I think maybe my first, the memory that I really remember was on Falcon Street. And you were maybe 1.5, you could talk. And Pat would say to you, if you're doing something, Mike, that's dangerous. Mike, that's dangerous. And you crawled up on the side of the couch, and she looked at him, and he said, dangerous, 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 Grandma. Dangerous. That's how I remember you.
Yeah. So that's where I get it. It's from Grandma.
Yeah.
What about Mom, Kathy? Do you have a favorite memory of her
Oh,
growing up?
Kathy, I got so many memories of her. But the memory that will stick with me forever, and I tell it often, is, I thought I had to get all kinds of jobs. And I had a poor mentality. I didn't know if there'd ever be enough money to take care of the family that was growing so big. So I got into the hog business when I had cable company, and I bought houses and sold them and all this good stuff, fertilizer companies. But and I'd have to do chores after I got off work. And I'd go out there and I'd take care of the hog chores, and I'd come running in, and she was maybe 2.5, 2 or 3. And she'd, Daddy, 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 and she'd come running toward me and get from here to that lamp, pew. And she'd turn away. So she liked me, but not if I was stinking. Yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
What about? Tell me a memory about, you guys used to do family vacations, right? And
Yeah, we went to
like
the lakes.
Bogie.
We went to the lakes, Lakewood. We went up there every year for a week to 10 days, and it was a Felco thing. And they had his west side of the Black Hawk, and there's a cabin, number 4, and that's the one we got every year. and it was right on the lake. And I had some meetings, but the kids all played around, and it was just a good time. And it was all the people that I knew and Pat knew too, elevator managers around the country that we had the same interests, the same, and it was a good time. But
Yeah.
also, some of the most fun we had is going to Minneapolis to ball games. We went to a lot of them. We'd stay overnight. Sometimes we had a Ford station wagon. We'd go up and come back. The first one we went to was in this station wagon before we found a decent hotel. And we were coming back and we stopped at St. Peter, Minnesota. And there was Pat, Mike, Tom, Joe. I don't know if Chris was around then yet. There was a kid that they played with, and there was a Donnie Jacobson. But at any rate, we stopped in St. Peter to eat. And I think Chris and Landy were along too, and they were little, so we had them at our table. But those other bigger ones, they had their own table. And I can't think of the kid's name, and it makes me mad because he was a good kid and he's still around. But he was the same age as Tom. And they ordered a meal, and of course I was going to pay for it. And the meal came, and this kid ordered a hamburger. When the hamburger came, he opened it up, and he said, "Miss, if I'd known you were this short of meat, I'd have ordered cheese." and just busted them up, and I thought we were going to get kicked out of the damn restaurant. But what was, and you know, this same kid, their coach, they were in junior high, and Tom was an athlete. He was really an athlete, and this kid was not going to get to play because he had long hair, and Tom just insisted that he play with him because he was a good player, but he was a kid with long hair, and the coach said he couldn't play unless he had it cut. So Tom says to me, "Dad, would you cut his hair?" And I said, "Sure." So I had him sitting in our kitchen, and he said, "Mr. Knobbe, don't cut it too short. Don't cut it too short." Well, he got to play. But Tom, there was a kid, a Peterson kid, and each time they had kids that had to choose a team. And when he got to be captain of the team and he got to choose, he went and picked this Peterson kid, and he's a poor player. And I said to Tom, "Why did you ever pick him?" He said, "He's always the last one to get picked, and I just wanted him to feel good."
Yeah.
Now, Tom wanted to win awful bad,
Yeah.
but he also considered kids. I sure miss that Tom yet.
Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit about him?
Tom, he was a 4A student, all A's. He had his mind made up to go to Notre Dame. And, well, when he was little, when he was born, Chris was little, just born. And he said to his brothers, "I'm going to teach Chris everything I know." And Pat or Mike, one of the two, said, "That'll take you about 5 minutes." But he never got anything, but he'd take Chris and he'd put him on his shoulders and he'd go to a ball game. And he said when he was born, he said, "Mom, he can sleep with me in bed." And Pat said, "No, he's not going to. You'll regret that." But Mike had a paper route, and on March 30th, the papers came in, and his alarm clock had been shut off, and there was a note on there, and Tom had written, "Mike, have a good sleep, happy birthday," and he went and delivered the papers for him.
Wow.
He was a good kid. He was also ornery. He had water balloons when we would go someplace. Why, we had to have a babysitter, and Mrs. Jeske, and Mrs. Jeske would come in, and she was just like an old grandma. But one day she was there, and we had that big, I don't know if you remember that big brick building, the brick house where we lived.
Yeah.
And at any rate, upstairs in their bedroom, they had screens that would push out. Well, he had this water balloon, and he was leaning clear out, and Mrs. Jeske came walking in and scared her, and she gave him a pat on the butt and pulled him in and said, "You can't do that." And Tom looked at her and said, "I'm going to tell my dad when he gets home." And she said, "That's fine with me, just tell him." Well, it got to be about time we were getting home, and he came up to Mrs. Jeske and said, "Mrs. Jeske, if you don't tell Dad, I won't tell Dad." He was in school, and he did something, I don't know what it was, but Mr. Craigmile was the superintendent, and he said, "Tom, I'm going to tell your dad, or you're going to get 3 swats with this paddle." Well, he said, just give me the 3 swats." And so he leaned him over the desk and gave him 1 swat. And he said, "Mr. Craigmile, I've changed my mind." He says, "It's too late." He gave both of them. And so Mr. Craigmile had to tell us that too. Oh my, he's a good kid. He was a good kid.
And so, did he die in high school?
He was a sophomore, summer sophomore. He had been working out in a bean field, cutting weeds, and that was when they were going to get a new Roadrunner Plymouth, and he was coming home in a Volkswagen, and he took that corner northwest of Farnville like this, and he may have been going too fast, I don't know, but he had Jerry somebody and Chris and Joe in the back, and it tipped over and threw him out into a field, and that's what killed him. And Joe called his mom and said, "Mom, Joe is dead." She said, "Joe, what are you talking about?" "Mom, Joe is dead." She said, "Joe, you're talking to me. You aren't dead." "No," she said, "Tom is dead." Well, I had, for some reason, had my pickup, and I don't know what I was going to do, but I decided to drive. So I drove by the house, and there wasn't any activity. And I drove out west of town, and I came that way, and here was Pat standing on the corner crying. And she says, "Our boy is dead. Tom is dead." And, they dedicated the yearbook to him. Yeah. They said, "More a leader than a student." He was well liked. He was a good kid. He was a little ornery. But when he was, I don't know how old, he crawled the water tower on a dare, and that railing that goes around there? Mm-hmm. He got up on that, and he's going to walk all the way around, and all the kids, "No, Tom, you don't have to do it." And another thing those 3 boys did, there was a park across the house from us where we lived, first when we got married. And they played over there a lot, but they caught a cat, and they threw it down in the privy. So I get home for lunch. Pat said, "You got a job to do." I said, "What?" "Well, the boys had a cat, and they threw it down the privy. You got to get it out." God. So I went and got a rake, and I got the rake, and I turned the damn thing loose. I don't know how he got cleaned up. And here again, Tom, when he was, I think, maybe 2.5 years old, they had a swing set, real tall. And somehow or the other, he crawled up and got up on that beam that goes across. And he was going to stand there and walk across it. And Pat saw him and came running across. And she got underneath him. And what she did is, "You're doing fine, Tom. You're doing fine." And she's going to catch him. But he got him to the other end and let him crawl down. But he was ornery. Beth, my secretary, had a bin site north of us, and I could drive home. And I didn't have a car, and I said, "Beth, can I use her car?" "Yeah." Well, Beth used to play with him, and she always had perfume on. And I could tell if Beth had stopped to see the boys and Pat, mm-hmm. and because she'd be holding them, and they'd smell of her perfume. Well, this day I was coming home from the bin site, and here was Tom out in the middle of the road. I just parked the damn car, and I gave him swats on his ass all the way home. But he thought it was Beth. He knew their car. Oh, God.
That's funny. Oh, so we're running out of time here in this one. I'm going to end this 'cause I want to ask you some of these other questions.
I'll keep them short.
Done singing. How do you feel?
Say relieved.
Yeah, relieved.
Okay, so the question was, tell me your happiest memory. Can you think of something that was your happiest memory?
No, I've had a lot of good ones.
A lot of good ones.
I don't know if I really don't know.
How about
How do you pick between two marriages?
two marriages?
Especially when one of them is sitting there listening.
Two marriages, a lot of
births. I tell you what, one of
kids and
the best
grandkids.
things was when you were born. We put that great big sign on the front of our house.
Mm-hmm.
It's a boy. And I said, I think we should go see. I told Pat, I think we should go see him. Well, she said, he's still in a hospital. I said, he's going to grow up. We got to see him when he's little. Well, you're only about a day or so old. So we drove to Cedar Rapids to see you.
Yeah. How about?
And another thing, when I hurt this knee, and you know how I hurt this knee?
Snake bite, you used to tell me.
Well, no, this this knee here. When you were little and you were living in South Bend,
Mm-hmm.
and we were playing football out in front, and you juked me, and that's when I hurt this knee.
Really?
Yes. So I got some dislike for you.
Well, so every time your knee hurts, you can think of me.
Okay. But I got a false one, and it's okay now.
Oh, that's right. How about what are you proudest of?
Oh, the families, the family.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe I've got too much pride in what I got done as a worker, a manager,
Mm-hmm.
in achieving, you know, Pat used to say she just hated for the elevator to be quiet. And I said, why? Because that's when you want to get something else started. That's when I started the cable company. That's when I got in the hog business. That's when I got into into fertilizer companies. That's when if there was a house in town for sale, I'd look at it and think it was too cheap and I'd buy it, and then try to find a buyer. You know,
Yeah. Always staying busy.
I had an active mind,
Mm-hmm.
and the elevator did good. You know, it grew from one of the smallest and it's the largest in the state now. Matter of fact, it's the largest local in the United States. They just
wow.
merged with West Central and FC Farnville, and there's no elevator that big, no cooperative company that big local. Is
Wow.
that? So,
And then you did a lot of
well, I was on all kinds of boards. I was on all kinds of boards.
Hospital and it.
Hospital board, yes. We're proud of heading this drive here for the new hall.
Mm-hmm.
But I helped start ABC, which is my retirement company. I was one of the first ones on FC, what became FC Stone, a brokerage company. I was on CoBank board in Denver, and it's bigger than the next three banks combined. I helped organize AGP and became the first chairman of the board. I consulted with the Union Pacific on one, and a Chicago Northwestern, and a Illinois, what is it? Chicago, Illinois elevator on short lines. And a contract I worked with the Northwestern was the very first one, and it was the one that every short line railroad used after that, the contract that we negotiated. And when I went to the bank at Omaha, that was the Omaha Bank for Cooperatives, they said, well, that's a good idea. I had the contract, it was signed off by every department head. And they said, that's fine, that's what you need. But where's the president of the railroad? How come he hasn't signed off? Mm-hmm. God, I went back home with my tail between my legs, and I sat down the next morning and I called Chicago, and I said, I want to talk to the president of the Chicago Northwestern. And lo and behold, they asked who I was, and they put me on. And I said, do you ever talk to a little peon out in Farnville, Iowa? And he said, what do you want? And I told him the story, and he said, you'll have a letter in the morning. And the letter came back, Dear Urban, Farnville, Iowa will not be deserted. The contract that you have with the different departments is bona fide, and we will stand by it. If they abandon from the railroad that you're hooking up south, we'll take you north. If they rig north, we'll take you south. You are going to have a railroad. So we got in the car with my president and it made a copy, but I kept the original and showed it to him, and we got the money. And what we did there is we furnished the money to update the railroad. We furnished the money, and they gave us money back for every car that we shipped. So what we were out during that short period was the interest on the money, and that was set by the Omaha Bank for Cooperatives, and it was a good rate. Yeah. And we paid off that loan from shipping in about a year and 2 months, when people said you'll never get it paid off. Yeah. But because we had all this volume from the different elevators around by shipping trains. It was
Wow.
it was just a
So what do you think? You have been very successful. What do you think contributed to that success? I guess what lesson did you have to learn in life that?
To treat people right first
Yeah.
and get along with people. But second, I think it's for being so damn poor when I was a kid. I think that I had a depression mentality almost to the day when I retired. But you know, there was a period there when I first started, I just worried about getting fired. But after about 15 or maybe, I don't know how many years, but there was a time in there when I had the attitude, if they fire me, I'm good enough that the next elevator opens up, I can get it. I lost my fear because my dad had a big family. And the first years they were married, things were good, but that was, you know, like when that bootlegger, there was no money in farming. And he lost the farm, and he lost his will. And I think that bothered me. I thought, what if this happens to me with this big family? Until I got cocky and figured that if something went wrong and I lost this job, I could get a better one. And I talked to Creston. Creston wanted to hire me. This town right north of Storm Lake wanted to hire me. There's different places. Land O'Lakes flew me out to an elevator on the other side of Omaha to see if I wouldn't take that job because they had a problem with it and they wanted somebody to pull them out. I think that I could have got a different job, but I really wasn't interested.
Yeah.
You know, there's something about having a job that you really like and have some comfort. This fear of losing a job is terrible. And I had it and I even had it with JJ because he is such a damn strict, mean bastard. He said to me one time, Urban, it isn't how hard you work, it's what you produce that counts. Now listen to that, will you?
There you go.
It isn't how hard you work, it's what you produce that counts. And he called his feed that he made production feed. Oh boy.
Wow.
It's good old JJ.
Well, you produced a lot.
Well, I don't know about that, but
How
I've
do you
had
think-
a good year of
Yeah.
life.
So how would you want to be remembered, or how would you like to be remembered in your time in at the elevator and your professional pursuits?
Well, I think I have that in the professionals because I am on a Hall of Fame in Iowa Institute of Cooperatives. So I think as far as people respecting the fact, I think that I respected people. You know, I had a rule that all the people that had the right to hire or fire, they had that. And because we didn't have what you call human resource section. But anybody that got fired, I interviewed to see what the reason was and I told all the people that had a right to hire that if they had to fire somebody, it wasn't that guy's fault. It was their fault for having hired him in the first place. They hired the wrong person if they had to fire him. So they were pretty damn careful who they did hire, and more careful the ones that they did fire. So I think that of anybody that worked with me or for me or whatever you want to say, would be glad to see me. Donnie Jake at the wedding the other day, he always talks about Mr. Knobbe, Mr. Knobbe. So.
All right, so last question, Grandpa. And this is for your great-great-great-grandchildren listening to this years from now. Is there any wisdom you'd want to pass on or things you'd want them to know?
Be good, be wise, be energetic, love your parents, Love your religion, whatever it is. Be loyal to the church. Be loyal to your country. Have a good life. It be all means love your mate. Now that's off the top of my head. If I could have
gave you
thought
some
about that a little bit.
Oh, that was very good.
It should make a good book.
Yes, a very good book. Well, we'll have to have more conversations.
Oh, we will. I don't think I'm going anywhere right
build-
away.
And build this out, because I did want. Unfortunately, I couldn't get that camera to work. But this is I like this app. They've got some good questions, and it was good sitting down and talking to you for a little
Well,
bit.
it's good to talk.
Yeah.
Just good to talk.
Donnie James, no,